neighborhood councils or community associations. Some of us don't. We represent a lot of the different neighborhoods within District 1. And our goal is to work together to advocate for our district. So we hope to do things like support neighborhood projects, support local nonprofits, support local businesses, help community members understand the budget process. But we actually want your help in helping us guide our work. So we have a survey back on the sign-in table that will help us. It'll take you 5 minutes and it'll help you tell us what we should do. And we're also seeking anybody to join us. We're just a group of basically neighbors from across this district who think that our voices can be stronger within the city if we're representing almost all of the neighborhoods in our district. And we've been grateful enough to have the support of our council member, Lisa Herbold. Staff has been attending some of our meetings. So we'd appreciate you filling out our survey and helping us continue this work. But today we're here to hear from Councilmember Herbold and Phil Tabel in this debate. And I am going to turn it over to Greg Kusumi. Did I pronounce that right? Okay, great, wonderful. Our host for this evening, and Greg is a supervisor here at Neighborhood House.
Thank you so much. All right, I would like to thank you all again for coming to tonight's debate as well as Neighborhood House. This is historically we kind of want to honor and thank the Native American peoples that we are on their land originally, and the Duwamish tribes. And also, we just want to thank just all of the residents and for, again, the District 1 Community Network for being partners with us for this. Thank you again, Lisa Herbold and Phil Tabel, as well for being here with us. All right. So I will kind of explain the breakdown for this debate as well as some of the rules. All questions here have been submitted by the District 1 Community Network groups as well as residents of High Point. There will be roughly a 20-minute period at the end for any questions from the audience. Rules of conduct, we would appreciate it if there was no cheering or applauding or outbursts from the audience. We do have a limited time, so in order to keep the program flowing, we ask that you kind of keep that to a minimum. Disruptors would be asked to leave. All right, so also questions will be alternated between the two candidates. And so to start that off, I will flip this domino because I don't carry change with me anymore. So we will do that at the end. How timing will be conducted for this debate, we will allow, so I will ask the question. Whoever is the current person to answer the question will be given 1 minute to have their opening statement, and then we give it to the other candidate for 1 minute as well. If the other candidate, the original candidate, would like to have a 30-second rebuttal, they will be able to do so. And then again, for the other candidate, a 30-second rebuttal to that. All right. And I would just like to thank and introduce also West Seattle Toastmaster Club member Allison Massey, our timer, who will be assisting Wes through this debate. And yeah, so you will see the timer out here on this pad. Perfect. All right. So if you guys would like, would you like to rock, paper, scissors for who decides who flips this, or? Okay. Would you prefer numbered or no numbers?
I will take no numbers, please.
Okay. All right, it is numbers. So Phil Tabel, you'll be taking the first question then, okay? Okay. All right. Right, so the first question that we have, as our population continues to grow and environmental impact is a priority in Seattle, what will you do to help future generations move around sustainably and safely in West Seattle?
Excellent question. I think we need to do as much as we can to increase the bus traffic around, bus travel around West Seattle so it's more effective. I know when we went through Viadume, we had a connector that was going around West Seattle that was quite effective, and I think we need to expand that. We need to complete the greenways around Seattle through the bike master plan. Something like that will at least, it's that sort of if you build it, we will come kind of thing, and we can show that we will have those pathways. And I think in general, just, also, not in West Seattle, but getting out of West Seattle, I think making sure we expand the water taxi is another good thing. But I think, as with a lot of these questions, one of the big answers is listening to the people. It's like when you read the blog and you look at all the comments, these are coming from people who experience those issues day in, day out. And I think as far as being green and being able to get around multimodally, we just need to listen to what the people want.
All right, just one moment. I'm going to let our interpreters, we do have interpreters here, give me the thumbs up that they're okay to go forward.
Actually, I just wanted to check actually for the interpreters, would it be easier for us to make sure we split up our answers? I realized I just sort of kept going there, and I want to do what's easiest for that.
Yeah, actually, if it's all right, interpreters, you're all right to talk into your microphones as the speakers go, and if you do need a moment, if you can raise your hand, if that works for you, the candidates, raise your hand. Interpreters, if you just need a moment. Okay, thank you. All right, Lisa Herbal.
Thank you. So the first thing that we need to do to make sure that folks are able to move around this district is to work together to defeat Tim Eyman's initiative, I-976. I-976 would make it impossible for the city to enact another transportation benefit district, which we need to work on next year. The transportation benefit district is what has allowed me, as your council member, to work to add bus service to serve the residents of District 1. We've been able to add so much bus service that Seattle is one of the only cities in the nation that is actually seeing an increase in transit use. I've worked to add bus service for the 131, the 120, the C, and also the line serving the Admiral District. This is really important to make sure that people are able to get around. We also need to increase our investments in Vision Zero and safe routes to school, and we need to use automated camera enforcement dollars in order to increase those investments and make our streets safe for students going to school.
All right, thank you. Do you have a rebuttal?
I would actually agree completely about defeating Tim Eyman's initiative on this one, because the Transportation Benefit District is something that has worked quite well. So I agree with Lisa completely on that.
Interpreters, just making sure that we're okay.
It's okay.
Okay. Oh yeah, perfect. Okay. All right, and anything for you? No? All right, thank you so much. Moving on to the next question. All right. Mayor Murray declared a homeless emergency in 2015. The total number of homeless people in King County has increased, though, over the years. If you are elected, what can we expect you to do, if you are elected, to decrease those numbers, as well ensure that there is performance requirements met?
So it is true that we have not been treating this state of emergency like it is an emergency. In order to do so, we need to massively increase our investments in homelessness services and affordable housing. A recent study that was commissioned by King County shows that we need to double our investments in this region to build more affordable housing to serve the needs. Our data shows that we're moving more people out of homelessness and into permanent housing more quickly than we ever have before. But more people are falling into homelessness because it is so unaffordable to live here. So these are the investments that I pledge to continue to work on. I worked on in encouraging and convincing the City Council to enact a housing bond to increase our investment in permanent supportive housing, and now that is part of regular business at City Council.
Okay,
So, it was good that there was an emergency announced. However, the issue has been that there has been no urgency with which the city has acted. We also need to recognize that, yeah, it's about homelessness, but the part of it which is about affordable housing and increasing that, that's not the center of it. At the center of this is about mental health issues and substance abuse issues and treating them effectively. And affordable housing is a key to that. Obviously, people need to be housed. We need to have that permanent supportive housing. We need to get it into every district in Seattle, but we need the services. We need the ability to help people get back on their feet and recognize what is at the root cause of the homeless issue. And as I've seen as a public defender and a lot of the people that I talk to that still do this on a day-to-day basis, it is mental health issues and substance abuse issues that are going untreated. And this is where the community just needs to step up and say, we are going to help these people, not just find housing, but find help.
Would you like to rebuttal?
Sure. So there's a lot of discussion about what causes homelessness, but the reality is there are a lot of contributors to homelessness, whether or not it's the rent, not income's not sufficient to pay the rent, substance abuse disorder, mental illness, domestic violence. These are all causes of homelessness. But as Gavin Newsom said the other day when Trump was visiting California around homelessness, shelter will solve the sleeping problem. It's permanent housing that will solve the homelessness problem. Regardless of what landed you into homelessness, permanent housing is what will solve your homelessness. Permanent supportive housing is a model of housing that will allow people to address their underlying issues. And regardless of whether or not you have mental illness, substance abuse disorder, 95% of people stay housed in permanent supportive housing.
Thank you. Would you like a rebuttal?
I would just continue with the fact that, Utah found out that just giving someone a roof doesn't answer their problem. Because there are a lot of people who find themselves in that situation without a home, and some of them do not have those skills and that support to be able to stay housed, even if you put them there. And that's where the supportive housing helps. But again, it's when we think about it as a housing problem first, I think we're missing it. We need to think about this, about the mental health and the substance abuse side first, and that the housing is something that comes after once we find a way to support those people.
All right, thank you very much for your answers. This next question is regarding green spaces and the West Seattle Golf Course. So the West Seattle Golf Course is a city park protected by city law. However, if there are plans to create it into low-income housing, there are concerns about where to find replacement green space land in West Seattle. If you choose housing, or if you have other plans regarding that, how would you support that, and how would you address that issue here in District 1?
So I do not think that there is a need to remove the golf course and replace it with affordable housing. As we know, the city is set up that it has to be replaced acre for acre if you remove it, and I don't think that the size of our problem is such that we need to do that, because you lose the golf course, you lose the 5% that they put back into the parks budget, you lose access to open space and active space that can be accessed by anybody. They have tremendous programs that target women and have minorities, and it's a low cost, and it's good to have that in a community. And once you lose it, you don't get it back. And I know once I had mentioned the fact that, if we had the same level of problem that Los Angeles had, where they're looking at 65,000 plus homeless people, we may have to look at doing something like turning one of the municipal golf courses into affordable housing, but that's not the level we have. So we need to protect our open space, and especially when it's active space that can be accessed by anybody, and we need to deal with the other problems separately.
Thank you. So let me first say there isn't a plan to convert our golf courses into housing. The mayor commissioned a report, and it was focused on the fact that our golf courses, the costs associated with their maintenance and operations, was outstripping the revenue that those golf courses was generated. And so they hired a consultant to figure out what could be done about that. And actually, the recommendations of that consultant were very favorable to golf. And they recommended looking at alternatives that include golf, but that include other open space uses of the golf courses. They focused on looking at the the St. Andrews model in Scotland. That's a famous golf course that also has a lot of other uses. I can tell you that my constituents in the junction are very concerned that the golf course counts towards their open space, and so anytime they go to the Parks Department to try to get more open space, the Parks Department says, you have that golf course over there. So I think people would like to see more uses of the golf course.
Any rebuttal? All right. Thank you very much. All right, this is a little bit more of a logistical question for you all. How will you keep your constituents informed regarding how you are accomplishing your campaign promises?
So if you go to my website at, let's see, what is it? District 1 for lisaherbal.com, you will see that my website is constructed around the promises I made in 2015. The front page says, these are the promises I made in 2015, and it links to all of the campaign communications I made with my supporters in 2015. So I'm holding myself accountable, and I expect the voters in my district to hold me accountable as well. I also put out a weekly newsletter, and I have office hours. You don't have to make an appointment. Folks just drop in. I move from neighborhood to neighborhood. I have office hours in South Park. I have office hours over at the Southwest Center, and I have office hours at the Senior Center. So I work to make myself accessible to everybody on all issues, and I expect to hear from folks what they think about my representation.
The key to accountability is being present in the community and being able to talk to the people that agree with you and the people who do not agree with you. You know, you make the promises in your campaign, you say the things you're going to do, and the way that works is, you know, I know for us, we're going to have an office in District 1. You know, we've had our campaign office here, and people come by and talk to us. I am, every Wednesday, you will find me at Tallarico's hosting trivia. You will continue to find me there doing that. Because the way you find out how you're doing as a job is by allowing people to tell you what they think and giving yourself the opportunity to say, hey, how am I doing? I also plan to do monthly town halls that we will move around District 1 so that every neighborhood is going to have a chance to talk to me about the things I've said that I'm going to do and that I have done, but also to hear more about what needs to be done next. You know, the things we talk about on the campaign trail, once the years start moving along, we find the other things that we have to start addressing. And it's not just about being accountable to the campaign promises, but what our constituents want on an ongoing basis.
Would you like a rebuttal?
Sure. I agree that being present is a really important part of accountability. I came here tonight from door knocking, and from folks I spoke to on the doors today, one person said that she remembered me attending an opening for the Southwest Historical Society. Another person mentioned that she had seen me at a neighborhood cleanup, and another person had mentioned that she'd seen me a couple weekends ago at Skate Like a Girl. So being present for your community is a really important part of the job, and people tell me every day that they appreciate my presence in this community.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, so this next question is, how will you support small businesses?
The biggest thing is actually going out and talking to them all the time. You know, talk to them before there's legislation that affects them. Talk to them when the city is going to do things like increasing the business license fee, and talk to them about that. And listen to the things that the city can do to help. The fact is, we hear more from the Office of Labor Standards making assumptions about small businesses in our community doing things wrong than we hear about the Office of Economic Development reaching out to how to do things that will help the business. How do we speed up permitting process? You know, the new Euro Hero that moved into Admiral, they had to wait 10 months while they were waiting for a permit for a hood on their kitchen. You know, there are other businesses that have to wait incredible amounts of time to add a patio or expand their space so they can hire more people in our community, and the city is not doing that. And so the thing I would do to help business is be a part of that community, talk to the people in it that I know, and go to them as frequently as possible to see what I can do to do more.
So again, helping small businesses is just like helping constituents. It means being responsive and coming out and hearing from them what their challenges are. I have the support of small businesses like the owner of Luna Park, because of the work I've done with him as well as his neighboring businesses on mitigating the impacts of the Avalon Corridor project. Working with them to figure out how to both accomplish the goals of that major transportation project while not negatively impacting that small, fragile business district. I'm also working to create something called a legacy business program that will then identify our most prized businesses in each of our districts and find ways to intervene, working with the Office of Economic Development to make sure that we're continuing to support those businesses. And then finally, I'm working also with the Office of Economic Development to create something called a 1% business stabilization fund, so that all of the city's construction projects, 1% of the budget is devoted to making sure that we are stabilizing those businesses when those large public work projects are happening in the business districts. So we're working together with the Office of Economic Development to figure out how to go about doing that, and it will be an ongoing line item in the budget for these needs.
Thank you. Would you like a rebuttal?
Just to say that I do think that our representative needs to do more to help the business community. I mean, down in the Avalon area where the work was, the Shack has had to close and sell because of the impact. And I know Luna Park Cafe and the Shack and Avalon Glassworks all had talked to the city about, please, any amount of time you can give us in the summer where we could actually be open without this traffic is going to give us a chance to make the money we need to make it through the rest of the year. The city didn't listen, and one of the 3 businesses there is now gone because of that.
A chance for
There are more than 3 businesses there, but the city did listen. They did not stop the construction during the summer, but they staged the construction in a way that minimized the impacts. They also provided overflow parking for the businesses that admittedly did not help the Shack because it is not a business that people will park and walk to. And then finally, we actually were successful in getting the Department of Transportation to restore a third of the parking that they were planning to remove as the long-term results of the project. So I spent a lot of time in that neighborhood working to mitigate impacts between Metro and SDOT, and I think we've gotten some good results.
All right, thank you for your responses. Affordable housing is the top of the list as the city begins to grow. Do the candidates see opportunities within the Alaska Junction Urban Village for affordable housing?
So I see opportunities for affordable housing in the entire city. Urban villages are the areas in which we like to focus our development of housing. And yes, absolutely. I think using the additional zoning that was granted through the Mandatory Housing Affordability Program to both encourage market rate development, but also to fund affordable housing development is going to be a key strategy for that community. And I think there are lots of really good opportunities for that. There's also the fact that we put a hold on the upzones of the single family zones within the junction, but we are going to be working with the city to do a neighborhood planning process to talk about where we can increase zoning to allow for transit-oriented development in the junction.
I mean, there certainly would be more opportunities for having affordable housing in the junction if, when we put MHA into effect as a city, we looked at the fact that the in lieu of fees for developers who are not going to include affordable units in their development would have to pay into a fund that would give us affordable housing. We need to that fee needs to be higher. We need more money generated in that development to create the ability to have more affordable housing. And on top of that, more importantly, the money needs to have the opportunity to stay where the development happened. And at this point, the only real teeth is just suggesting that the money should stay in that area, but that doesn't help. There needs to be an edict and a time period that says, if there is development in this region and they take advantage of the upzone and the fee has been paid, which should be larger, that money can stay in that area. And then the other thing is protecting the affordable housing we have, that, we're talking about preserving that, but this is a conversation should have had years ago, so we didn't lose the affordable housing to housing that hasn't been so affordable.
Sure, thank you. So, first of all, I think it's important to realize that the City Council in its ordinance intentionally created the MHA program so that half of the housing built would be built on site, the affordable housing would be built on site, and then half of the developers would contribute to the in lieu fee. The reason is that the in lieu fee leverages for every $1 another $3 in affordable housing. So we want the in lieu fee because it will build more housing, but we also want housing built in the buildings themselves. We are going to monitor whether or not we're going to hit that 50-50 mark, and we have made a commitment in the ordinance that if we don't meet that 50-50 mark, we will increase the fee to create less of incentive to pay the fee and more of an incentive to do what they call perform, build in the housing that they build, include the affordable units.
Thank you. Would you like to chance?
Yeah, I would just say, I mean, yes, the city council did talk about the fact that it should be 50-50. However, there was a lot of evidence brought to the council that there are not developers that are going to choose to include the affordable housing when the ALUA fee is low enough that it's just easier for them to pay that fee. Plus, you know, they have to have ongoing financial reviews of the people who would be in those affordable units. And I know I was part of a group that spoke to 36 different developers that said they would pay the fee. It's too low, it's too easy, and there's no reason not to. So it's not going to be 50-50. And the problem is the amount of time that we're going to spend, which I can't remember if it was a year or a year and a half or possibly even 2 years before it would be reevaluated. That's too long. We need that housing now, and we need that housing built now.
All right, thank you very much for your responses. All right, this next one is kind of connected to the whole apartment complexes, but regards transportation. What is your view of multi-unit apartments being built with very little or no on-site parking for residents? There are concerns about flow of traffic and street parking.
Well, I know on the doors, I have literally heard from hundreds of people about the fact that the parking is becoming an issue. And part of that is not allowing development to go up with too few parking spaces available. I know one of the things that happens is the developers will put in the parking, they'll offer it to people, but they'll offer it at a significant increase in cost. People will say, oh, hey, I'll just park on the street, so they don't park there. So the next time that developer goes back to the city looking to permit building, they say, oh, well, only 30% of our parking was used last time, which is because it was so much more money to add that into the rent that they said, they then get allowed to have 30% less parking in the next building, and on and on. And so I am concerned that the trend is to have less and less parking available on site in these developments. And I don't think we're looking intelligently enough at that effect, and especially since we've got the free parking in the junction right now that has, come under attack. We hope to keep it, but we need to be smarter about how we look at that parking and not just say people are all going to bike and walk. There still are people with cars that are taking those apartments.
So the areas in the city where parking is not required by development are specifically areas that are defined as frequent transit areas in urban villages. A couple years ago, the city had a proposal to expand the size of frequent transit areas so that more land is included in those frequent transit areas and more developers would be able to use the parking exemption. I was the only council member that voted against that change. Because I feel really strongly that we should not have a one-size-fits-all approach towards any of our land use and zoning decisions. And I felt really strongly that we should allow for the Department of Construction and Inspections in exchange for issuing a permit to mitigate parking impacts in those areas where parking requirements were otherwise exempt, in areas where they were already at 85% of parking capacity. I did not get the support of my colleagues on the council. I still support an approach like that because it recognizes that not all neighborhoods are the same, and some neighborhoods are already at capacity.
Would you like a rebuttal? Okay. All right. Sorry, I've got multiple sheets of questions. I'm trying to bounce back and forth.
Right.
All right, so how will you address problems where people illegally dump garbage in our streets and yards?
So the city has actually a pretty good litter abatement program. You can make a report on the Find It, Fix It app, and Seattle Public Utilities responds as it relates specifically to litter within 24 hours of receiving a complaint. There aren't patrols of people out looking for places to collect litter, but that said, Seattle Public Utilities does return on a regular basis to areas that there are frequent problems. So they're trying to do a balanced approach, both with going to locations where there are frequent illegal dumping problems, but also responding to complaints. But this is where I and the city need your help to file those complaints, because we can't be everywhere at all times. And so again, the city has an approach of responding to illegal dumping and litter complaints, and I think they actually do a really good job on it. I actually have Seattle Public Utilities in my committee, and I get regular reports on their fulfillment of the commitments as it relates to litter abatement. But again, they need to hear from you.
I mean, this is one problem that I've actually heard now from several different neighborhoods where they've had large amounts of garbage that they've had to deal with, sometimes left over by people who've been camping, sometimes from RVs, sometimes trash that had been picked up by someone that had been living on the street, and where those piles of garbage are sitting there for days and days, and that they are not getting the response from city departments, but they do get a runaround saying several times, one department saying it's not their issue, call someone else. And unfortunately, we've had this situation where the people in those neighborhoods have had to come together and clean it up themselves. And that's completely inappropriate. And this is exactly where the council representative needs to stay on top of those departments to make sure that when they fail, that they're held accountable for that failure. And even sometimes, it brought to the public that this is exactly who you have to go to. Because I know there are mechanisms there for it to be cleaned up, but it just doesn't always work.
Would you like to respond?
Sure. I agree. This is where my constituent response program comes in handy. When the departments aren't responding, contact me and we'll get on it. We have a really good success rate of people getting their complaints addressed through my office when the departments aren't responding.
Would you like a chance? I also have been told that we have some more people from the community that came in, so if we can slow down, just let me know. Interpreters, if you do need a moment, please raise your hand, and we will pause the time so you can catch up. All right, thank you very much. All right, so this is more of a community question here at High Point, but it might apply in general for District 1. In High Point, there are concerns around neighborhood security, especially gang recruitment. How will you address neighborhood security as a whole?
The first thing is, one of the things is trying to bring our police department up to proper staffing levels. I sit on the Southwest Precinct Advisory Council, and in that role, I get to listen to the police, to Captain Davis here at the Southwest Precinct, and as well to the lieutenants who deal with these issues and say that they do need more feet on the ground. And in terms of gang recruitment, one of those things is to be able to support their gang units, and they need that by having some bicycle police out, some foot patrols out that can see things on the ground that you can't always see when you're driving by. Now, that's only part of it. One of the things that needs to happen is some outreach into the community to help the community in itself do that. I know when we were here actually last time, several of the mothers had talked about the fact that, they had sons that it was hard to control them and listen, and what can they do to help? And so I'm going to be coming back actually with someone from the police department and the prosecutor's office to talk about empowering the community and to say what tools can we give you to help.
So I agree with Mr. Tavel that more police visibility is really important, and the way we get more police visibility is by addressing our staffing crisis. Seattle is not the only city that is having a staffing crisis. 80% of large cities in the nation aren't meeting their hiring goals for the department. About 5 years ago, we made a commitment to increase the size of our police department by 200 new officers. We're falling behind on those goals. The city council right now in the budget process is focusing a lot of its time and effort and resources on designing recruitment and retention programs like hiring bonuses, $10,000 hiring bonus for new officers and lateral transfers. But you know, one of the other things that I heard last night when I was here last night for a Somali women's East African Women's Night was that folks really feel that it would be important for this community to have more programs that are focused on allowing the young people to participate in their culture. And I think I would really love the opportunity to work with Neighborhood House and the Parks Department to talk about how we could put together a program like that for the young people, because I know that there is a real concern in this community about the traditions of the people who live here being lost and being replaced by negative activity that young people are getting involved in.
So there are two things. One, we actually do need to reach out more into the different communities in this city to get police recruitment from those communities. Like, I would love to see the Southwest Precinct actually have new officers who are coming out of this community, you know, so that if you've got an issue with a cultural loss or cultural identity, you have officers that are part of that culture. So to be able to reach into the East African community to recruit police officers. And the other thing about staffing is we need to talk about net numbers, not just adding 200 jobs, but to also talk about the jobs that are disappearing with the police officers who are leaving.
So as it relates specifically to recruitment from diverse communities, I championed on the council a preference points program. What that does is that requires the Seattle Police Department in hiring new officers to give extra points to people who speak other languages so that they are more competitive in getting these jobs, these high-paying law enforcement jobs, working for our communities in a way that is culturally relevant to the communities that they work in. So I totally agree that we need, again, to have recruitment strategies that are really focused on incentivizing these jobs for the people we want to take them.
Thank you very much. All right, what will you how will you address the need to increase programs and class options for our schools that are majority low-income families to ensure equity?
So the Seattle School District is a separate governmental entity. It's not run by the city. And so the way that I can work as a city council member to impact things like school size and what happens within the school district, there are two things I can do. I work with our state legislature and our school district to address the funding challenges that the school district has. It's the state legislature that deals with the funding of the Seattle Public Schools. So we have an Office of Intergovernmental Relations at the city. They lobby down at the state legislature during the legislative session for laws and funding that impact our residents. And so sometimes working on school funding is a really high priority. Times like now when we do have a class size issue. The other thing that we work to do is we don't fund the education programs at the school, but we fund other programs that help with what's called school readiness. And you, as voters, vote to pass levies that fund these programs. So those are things like the nurse partnership, family support, other arts education, some of the other types of programs that are in the school that aren't specifically related to education, but are related to readiness, so kids are ready to learn, are things that the city works to fund.
So it is unfortunately true that the city council, there are real limits to what it can do in terms of working with the Seattle schools. But one of the things that I think we could do is trying to activate the schools after hours more. You know, when classes are done, bring people back, you know, teach civics, bring people from the community who are retired in, you know, and have had different jobs in different fields, bring them back in to teach classes that are with the parents and with the students together. And so I feel in general we need to do more to work on our educational system, but I think there are things the city can get involved with extracurricular programs.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, just I've been reminded again actually that I'm going to slow it down. So if you do see an arm raised, feel free to pause. Well, the timer will pause for you as well. Okay, so and then we can continue. Thank you very much. All right, so this next question is, how will you address the need for support in adult education programs in the community, especially for low-level ESL learners?
Absolutely. So, as I said a minute ago, it's a, oh, we need to find ways to use our schools and also South Seattle College to offer more programs for people in the community. And so education is profoundly important to me. Both of my parents were teachers, and I was a high school teacher. And so I think we need to find as many ways as possible to create educational opportunities that are free, that are sponsored by the city for the people who live here. And I know especially with English as a second language, we need to do more to recognize how many different languages are here now and how many people have moved here that need help understanding what our system does and what things they can access. And I'll just finish with saying we do also need to offer more opportunities for interpreters to get involved, especially like events like this, where they can be done in more than one language so that people can participate who are new to the community.
So as a person who used to be on the board of Neighborhood House, this organization, I have strong connections to people in this community and people who help me understand what the needs are of this community. I have worked to bring funding for a citizenship program to Neighborhood House, to the High Point residents. And I've also worked to get funding for a program called Ready to Work. That is a program focused on literacy and job training skills. That program also is based right here in High Point at this Neighborhood House facility. I'm proud that I've been able to come back for the graduations of students who have taken the Ready to Work program here, and I'm going to continue to work with the residents of this community to find out what their needs are for adult education.
Any additions? All right. Thank you very much. All right, so it is almost 5:30. It is 5:29 officially right now. I would like to open this opportunity to the audience to ask any questions. If you do, there is a mic right here. And if you require interpretation for your question, please ask Mr. Osman to ask the question for you. All right, thank you very much. Just a moment before we do introduce you. He's going to also interpret your question, if that's all right. So you go ahead and ask your question. He will interpret it. And then I kind of forgot who was last speaking. Okay, so it'll be Lisa. Okay, perfect.
Okay, so in the primary in August, there were 40,000 registered voters in District 1 that did not participate in our democracy. So I'm curious as to what your campaigns are doing, other than doorbell knocking, to reach out to those 40,000 folks that needed to participate in our democracy.
Could you repeat your question? Sorry.
So in the primary in August, there were 40,000 registered District 1 voters that did not participate in our democracy. So what are your campaigns doing, other than doorbell knocking, to engage those 40,000 residents to get them to participate?
So my campaign is a people-powered campaign. I've got lots of people out working, doing lots of different things, whether or not that means doorbelling, and I don't think we should discount doorbelling because that is the most effective way of getting people out to vote, that one-on-one contact. But we've also been participating in community events, every forum. We do mailings, we do phone calling, you know, all of the nuts and bolts things that every campaign has to do. We had better voter turnout in this primary than we had in the 2015 general election. So that's saying something. A lot more people came out to vote in the primary this time than voted in the general election in 2015. But we have to do more of that. Turnout is really, really important. I totally agree that we need to come up with ways of reaching people that resonate with them and that inspire them to vote. And I do believe, because the question was asked besides door knocking, I do believe that one-on-one voter contact, and it's demonstrated by the data, is actually the most effective way of reaching people. It gives people a sense of the issues that you care about, and it, you know, people are really surprised when they see me on the door, because they expect somebody who is in office to just stay at home and send their volunteers out to do the door, or have paid canvassers do door knocking for them. But I'm out there talking to people because that's how I not only engage people to participate in our democracy, but that's also how I find out what people care about. That's how I make my campaign commitments for the next time, should I get reelected, serve in office.
three things that our campaign is doing specifically to target getting people interested in voting. The first one is to target actually the youth vote, who the 18 to 30-year-olds only came out across the city at 10.5% during the primary. So we are going to do a youth event basically saying, talking to youth not about specific issues, but about the importance of getting activated and participating. That they shouldn't have other people deciding their future for them. So we're going to use spoken word, music, and art to try to activate a younger audience just to think about why they should vote. The other thing is we're actually trying to have house parties that specifically target people who didn't vote in the primary and to address those reasons why they didn't come out. So part of that is getting the people who are activated and who are voting to tell their friends who aren't why they should care enough to come out and vote in the general. And then the last part is talking to people one-on-one, but at bars, at restaurants, at places where they aren't necessarily thinking about voting, and telling them why they should.
Actually, could we have the timer back then for the general questions? Thank you. Any other? Perfect.
All right. My question, define your specific strategies for effectively obtaining consensus from your council colleagues and do you have a positive track record with these strategies? Thank you.
So for me, the first part of that is spending time one-on-one with the other council members to get a sense of the things that are going to be important to them. The whole way to build consensus, and this is something that I've done in my job as a public defender, is you reach a foundational point where you can agree on something important. And then you build on that foundation, basically one idea at a time, so that you can hash out the disagreements, but find solid footing to move forward and upwards on. That consensus is about people getting a chance to say what their differences are, but that we should all be working for the greater good of the people of Seattle, not for some, individual good for the politician or just for one community. And I know for 15 years, bringing people together who are the victims of crimes, people who are charged with crimes, and the prosecutors and the probation and the jail staff, it's a lot of people that have to come together to agree on what that punishment and what that rehabilitation needs to look like. And I will apply those things that have worked to the job on the council.
Lisa?
So I think I can say with some confidence that I do have a really strong track record of building consensus on the council. Two examples, I mentioned earlier the $29 million housing bond. Despite the fact that the council's finance chair, the city's budget director, and the mayor all opposed using our bond authority, that's our debt, our ability to issue debt, to build affordable housing, I was still able to convince 7 of 9 council members to support a housing bond. As I mentioned earlier, it is now considered regular business to use our debt authority now to build housing. That has been established now since 2017. Another example where I helped create consensus was about the mandatory housing affordability upzones for the junction. There's a lot of pressure on the council to approve the upzones as recommended by the mayor. It was really important to my voters, my constituents in the junction, that we hit pause on those upzones in order to allow that community to come together and do some neighborhood planning around future upzones. I was able to convince other council members that that was a wise choice. That said, I do agree that seeking consensus is good, but there are also times when I think it's important to vote your conscience, to make sure that people's interests are always represented, even if those interests are not aligned with the majority of the council. An example of my taking a principled dissenting vote is in the instance of the streetcar, funding for the streetcar. I think that's a waste of precious transit dollars that could be better spent on other transit needs. And another example, there are actually 2 other examples, the sugary beverage tax. I was the only council member that voted against that. I feel it's regressive against communities of color and small businesses. And then finally, as I mentioned earlier, I voted against the expansion of the frequent transit area.
Would you like a rebuttal?
I think we can move on to the next question.
The next.
My question is to go with Mr. Fell. Good evening, Lisa and Mr. Fell. If I'm right, are you saying you are a teacher?
I taught.
Oh, you wasn't, okay. I am a teacher and family educator at the neighborhood house, and I'm serving low-income family, refugee, and diversity group. My attention to go you, if you as a teacher, you know how big inside us. One question I'm ask you as like our Mr. Governor, he's a teacher too, Ashley. But still is not fixed the problem. The classroom was really now big and big, but commitment is not come true. How much percent I can ask for you fix the problem, the classroom size? Are you work for that in future?
decision that the state legislature makes. And so we have other elected officials that represent us at the state. And so I will work with them to make sure that they work for more funding to reduce the size of the reduce classroom size so that teachers can work with students and attend to their special needs.
So I also wish that our council could have more control over things like classroom size and issues in our schools. But even though we can't exercise direct control over it, we could bring people together to show our state legislators and the governor how many people support moves like that. So I'd actually like to put together a group where we could have teachers sign on and students and administrators and have a very long list of people showing the governor and the state what things we need to change, like class size, to improve our educational system. And even though I can't change it directly, I would like to be the one that can amplify the voice of the teachers that want that change.
Thank you. And then my next question is go to Lisa. Lisa, you give a lot of option. You working on a neighborhood house, and I know because I work with the low-income family. They are most of my parents to my classroom. Therefore, to get the job, and I see the program you it's a bright program, all of ESL and working reading readiness out. But the last things is neighborhood family. I ask you request is like. Me as it myself and our teachers also, how you control them to their wages is so low. Is this possible? You can work for us neighborhood house teachers?
So neighborhood house is Neighborhood House is a privately run nonprofit. We don't pay your salaries, nor do we control what salaries you receive. For city-funded organizations, city-funded nonprofits, the City Council recently passed legislation that requires the city to provide sufficient funding for an annual raise that matches the cost of living increase. But that is for those organizations that receive city funding. Some neighborhood house programs do receive city funding, and so they will have this new rule, but I don't neighborhood house programs receive the funding. So if you want to talk to me afterwards, to give me the name of your program, I can look into it.
Okay, like 5 seconds.
I mean, I would just say, I do a lot of fundraising for a lot of charities in West Seattle, like the Helpline and the Food Bank and the YMCA, and so if there is a need for money for educational support at Neighborhood House, I would love to hold a fundraiser for you.
Thank you.
Okay. Actually, we have some people behind you, so.
But I can request one. Can I do one request?
After the next people.
Yeah, but that is request for my communities.
Okay. Thank you.
Dan Gage, I'm wanting to know what's the progress on the consent decree and SPD. I'm not a fan of SPD.
Yes, Seattle Police Department. So Judge Robarts, over the summer, held that the police department is partially not in compliance with the consent decree. Oh, yes, that Judge Robarts, over the summer, held that the police department is partially not compliant with the consent decree. And so, in a very short version, some of it has to do with holding with the accountability part, and some of it has to do with arbitration over disputes when officers are charged with crossing the line. And so the consent decree is still in place. And I do believe that Judge Robarts' findings have also been appealed by the city attorney.
So to add to that, because there was a request for the update on where we're at. I was going to provide, the question was, what is the update? And I was going to provide what the update is. The judge requested that the city submit to the court its plans for an approach to get out from, or to get back into compliance. And the mayor and the city attorney submitted a plan to Judge Robart to hire a consultant to review our police accountability system and that of other cities. And once the consultant collected that information, they would submit an approach to address the 3 problems that the judge identified. are right now waiting to find out what the judge thinks of that plan and if it will be sufficient.
All right, thank you very much. Before we jump in, I want to let you know, one moment, sir, that the event does end at 6 o'clock. It is 5:54 right now. We do invite the candidates to stay on until 6:30 if you would like to, and the general public as well if you are so interested. But we do have just one final other question, sir. Did you have a...
Okay, as we see today with our national politics, we're coming down hard on the administration, that if you keep up this filing lawsuits and refusal to talk, I mean, why are we having the mayor and the city attorney, I suppose, file a protest? When are we going to prosecute and put away the bad dudes? They need to go to jail.
I'll have you step to the side over there. If, Mr. Osman, if you want to interpret, and I can allow for about a minute each, and then you will be the last person at the question, at the board. Oh, and Mamata. Yeah, Mamata, if you want to come up, actually, if she's still here. All right, cool, awesome. But Mr. Osman, if you want to interpret that, the statement.
Oh, I think.
Sir, if it's okay, if you would like to speak to the candidates afterwards, perhaps, if that's all right. Thank you. It's okay, it's okay. All right, sir, Jen.
Yeah, I was looking to see, for State Road 99 from the West Seattle Bridge to downtown, I've noticed we've got the reintroduction of the bus lane. Even for bus traffic, it seems like the duration of the commute is now about 20 minutes longer due to the bottleneck of the on-ramp from West Seattle Bridge to State Road 99. So to see if there's any interest in conducting a study to evaluate the impact of that reintroduction, or maybe enabling that lane for HOV use as well.
So I've made that request.
Wait one second. Sorry, I'm gonna have him interpret it. Yeah.
So it's a great example of folks in this district using their voice and contacting their council member. I've received at least 40 emails from members of the public about this. I immediately contacted SDOT as well as Metro and WashDOT and asked them to review the impacts of restoring the bus lane. We also had a budget presentation because the council is in the budget deliberations right now on Friday. And Director Zimbabwe was before the council to do the SDOT budget, and I pointedly asked him what his response was going to be to the situation. Director Zimbabwe is a West Seattle resident and a bus commuter. And he appreciates the irony of a bus lane resulting in bus backups. So they're looking at it.
Yeah, the only thing I want to add is, I would love to see what some of the simulations were and how they were showing this was going to look before they instituted it.
All right, we have time for one last. So whoever's going to be up at the mic, I have time for one last one.
Microphone can get tilted up.
Hi, my name is Ayan. I'm a resident in Anton. Lisa said earlier. magacayga ayaan waaye xaafadan deganahay.
She said, my name is Ayan, I live in this neighborhood.
Lisa said earlier she was here last night, women's night out. And mother,
Otherwise, it was business and last night, and
and she said the mothers who were there asked her, we are having a crisis when it comes to our youth or young not know the culture of the community or the language of the community. If I'm not mistaken. So then I hear Philip say, when you say how do we solve that also, I hear, I may be making a lot of mistakes, but I thought Philip said that we need people who are representing for the community, who know the culture and can tell us to join the police department or the groups. And so my question, is, if we don't invest those young people with who lost their language and their culture, how are we going to have people who are coming out from the community and joining the police department?
So are you asking about, how do we get people from this community into the police department if the problem is that they're not being part of the culture of this community?
No, so the question being asked Lisa last night was our youth, because they don't have places or environment to practice their culture in their community, or they also are losing their language. Maybe I'm forgetting the whole question, but she said they asked me that. And then to solve that problem, I thought you say, in order to solve that problem, we need people coming out from the community and joining the police department and other departments. So representing the community. So my question is, if we don't invest those young people who lost their language here in the community, how are they going to represent their community where they lack in all those, the language, the culture?
So, obviously the biggest thing is to support Neighborhood House, and instead of, having this, instead of the focus being on this community, in an East African community becoming part of the larger community, a way to have the East African community keep that culture alive and bring it to the rest of the West Seattle community, so that it's about highlighting the importance of not losing that cultural identity of the East African community, as opposed to just integrating in West Seattle and the greater community. And I know for me, one of the things that I would do as a council member is to learn more about how I can support this community to retain its identity, keep it strong, but integrate while keeping its individuality. So I agree that I see the importance that if you take a youth who's, let's say, Somali, and they just sort of become a Seattleite, that it doesn't help bringing them back into the Somali community, that they need to bring that identity as a Somali back into the community as a strong part Somali, part Seattleite voice. And I just want to make sure, does that get to the question you were asking?
Kind of. I'm not specifically looking for Somali. I'm looking for, and I'm not only speaking for the Somali, I'm speaking for the community.
Right.
Hype of the West Side community. So I will speak different language other than English. So, like if my son is joined the police department, they're already in the system in America, the system of Seattle, the system of West Seattle, they have no problem. But what we say is that they losing their culture, their language. So if my son becomes police, he will not be able to know my culture or my language because that's what we will see. And that's what we need help.
Okay.
Yeah, so, I talk a lot about how proud I am that I got to work with community members here to get funding for programs that people here need, like the citizenship program and Ready to Work. But I recognize that those are programs that are about assimilating into the United States. And what I hear you saying is you have other needs that aren't being met for your families and your children. And so one of the other things we talked about last night is perhaps working with the Department of Neighborhoods to get a neighborhood matching fund grant to help develop the type of program that this community needs. And the Department of Neighborhoods, they will take a very, very simple grant application, and they have staff that will help you fill it out. It's one page, they make it really easy, and they help you develop the proposal in order to get funding. And so I want to do that. I want to work with you to develop the kind of programs that you need, because that's my commitment to this community.
All right, Phil, do you have a?
Thank you so much.
Yeah. No, just to say that that's a bigger issue than can be answered in 1 minute, but I would love to continue that conversation with you.
All right, thank you very much.